Hello again, Nick. Thank you for coming back to the to another one of my Nintendo history streams. I'll get started in a second. Just need to post my video in a few places. If What do you personally think of the DS, Nick? Maybe tell me if you played it. Maybe tell me some of your favorite games. Yeah, had some technical issues on my computer. It's really slow when I do these streams, but it's all good. Anybody else? Anyone who's watching, go ahead and let me know your thoughts on the Nintendo DS. I'll start in a second talking about the basic history as well as the system itself and my favorite games and my overall thoughts on the success of the DS. Yeah, and before starting, maybe I'll go over some of the live chat comments. Where Nick said, some of my favorite DS games are Mario Kart DS and Animal Crossing Wild World, which are also two of my favorite games on the DS, and I played them a lot as a kid, and I'll talk more about them um, later on tonight as I go through games. Also, the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games are really good. And yeah, they're also memorable games as well. I do have a copy, but like Pokemon and a lot of JRPGs, it's really that my sis got the most out of those games. I'm not so good at those games. Again, I think I like Pokemon from a superficial level. Like, I like to collect the plushes of Pokemon. In fact, here's my special guest for this video, Pikachu. Let's see here. And I've watched the show, the anime, like on and off basis. I believe it's on Netflix if you want to check it out. But I was never like really really good at the games. Part of it was because as a kid I had a really stupid strategy in that I would just be like I would always use the attack moves, but I would never use the moves that would like lower the defenses of the opponent or lower the attack of the opponent or consider things like do leaf types play well against water types and that sort of thing, that kind of strategy that didn't I had a hard time in keeping that strategy in mind as a kid because I just wanted to, bam, 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 and attack and that kind of thing. Nick said, you like Pikachu plushie? Yeah, Pikachu plushie is awesome. Have you seen? I got around to seeing that Pokemon episode where they show Pikachu's early days back when he was still a Pichu. It actually brought me and my sis pretty close to tears. And watching the Kangaskhan raise uh, the Pichu that will go on to be known as Ash's Pikachu. And actually, yeah, come to think of it, Pokemon kind of like Earthbound. And it's one of those Nintendo franchises where it has those moments like every so often where Nintendo really likes to tug at the heartstrings. Like I could think of a couple Pokemon episodes that got me either in tears or pretty close to tears. I imagine a lot of people, even the first episode, I think people would really find that emotional where Pikachu has to save Ash's life and he comes out wounded and that sort of thing. So I kind of feel like that's the thing that not many people like talk about when it comes to Nintendo. A lot of people when it comes to Nintendo talk about, oh, it's this really fun company, but it has its emotional gems, whether it be Pokemon and even more so Earthbound, especially Mother 3 with Hinawa's story. Every time I go around talking about Lucas from Smash, it's funny because as a kid I was like, who's this kid in Smash Brawl? And now it's like, this kid has been through some really dark stuff, so it's just crazy. But I guess that's, the effect of really good storytelling. So I have one last thing to do and then I'll get started. Nick said, yeah, Mother 3 is really emotional. I was actually really surprised because when I first heard of Mother 3, basically heard it was basically the forbidden fruit of Nintendo games. It's one of those games where it's like, oh, it's only released in Japan. And the thing I heard at the time was that it was really like potentially controversial because of things like characters and how there was also the character Kumatora who swears quite a bit for Nintendo character, which I honestly think is the least of Mother 3's. One of the least of the things of Mother 3 that would come off as really like controversial, since there have been some Nintendo games released stateside with like swearing and so forth. Xenoblade Chronicles, for instance. Not that it's a horrible game, it's just that it's not as like shocking to me as it was maybe in the past. Like even in the N64 game Sin and Punishment, the one time there was a character that got pissed off and she was like, "Damn it!" Which that's really like crazy stuff to hear from a Nintendo character. But that was like 20 years ago. But then again, Sin and Punishment was a game that was released for the N64 only in Japan, and then when Nintendo released it for Virtual Console, that's when it got really popular. So, okay, so I think I could finally start. So, hey everybody, Bloodman Bobby here. So, continuing on my discussions of Nintendo handhelds histories on their birthdays. Know that earlier this week that I discussed the GameCube and the Wii U, and last night I discussed the Wii on their anniversaries. Although, short disclaimer, I did the GameCube anniversary on its North American anniversary because I missed its Japanese anniversary. But we're here tonight to discuss the Nintendo DS. Yes, I am holding a DSi. The reason is because the DSi is the only working DS I have. The only other one is my original DS, which no longer works. So, as with the other consoles, I'm going to be talking a bit about the history of the DS, as well as talking about some of my favorite games, and going over the lifetime sales of the DS, because I believe the DS is one of the most successful like Nintendo systems that the company has released. I'll double check in comparison to the original Game Boy, because I think the Game Boy Advance sold like 80 million in units in its lifetime if you don't count original Game Boy and Game Boy Color, whereas the original DS sold well over 100 million units. Like even more, I think it even sold even more units than the original Wii, but I'll double check that. So, where did the DS basically begin? Which, by the way, a fun fact I recently learned, because I also like to learn about the car industry. The name DS also is the name of a French luxury car brand owned by a company called Peugeot, because DS, I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's close to the French word for goddess, and that's why it's called DS. So I thought it was interesting. It's like, what? There's a car brand called DS? So, but anyway, the Nintendo DS was first unveiled in a prototype form at E3 2004. IGN said that Nintendo initially announced the DS in January, but it sounds like it was the kind of thing where they just announced it exists, but they didn't show what it looked like in a prototype stage until E3 2004. And yeah, so Reggie Fils-Aimé got up on stage, sorry about that, and showed off this prototype of the original DS. It looked a little different in terms of like button placement and aesthetics, but it looked kind of similar to the original DS. And he announced that the DS would go on sale later that year. Interestingly, he said that the name Nintendo DS was just a code name, kind of like the Nintendo Revolution, which would go on to be known as the Nintendo Wii. DS was also supposed to be originally a code name, but that ended up being the final name of the product. Of course, we know DS is believed to stand for dual screens. There is sort of a myth as far as what were the true origins of the DS. Supposedly, the late Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi, who is the guy who ran Nintendo basically through a good chunk of the 20th century. Like, this was the guy you could basically credit for turning Nintendo into a toy company, into the video game company they are today. And Yamauchi supposedly had a dream about a dual screen system, and he came to Nintendo and said, hey, try making a new portable system with dual screens, which I know Nintendo dabbled with dual screens in the past with one of the, or at least some of the Game & Watch systems which had dual screens, but supposedly Yamauchi was like, yeah, try making a new dual screen system, and thus we had the DS. And so the DS would go on to be released on November 21st, 2004, which makes it 16 years old, which is really crazy to me, because it's funny, because when I got the Wii back in 2006, that was back when the original NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, was turning 20 years old, and now the DS is nearly getting to that point where it's, in a few years, it'll be 20 years old. So it was released in 2004. I got my original DS actually in January 2005. What happened was I was introduced to the DS when my cousin from Chicago came over to visit for Christmas, and he brought this system. It was the original DS, and at the time, it actually wasn't the dual screen aspect that really impressed me. It was actually just the fact that it was a touchscreen, because for me, touchscreen devices, because keep in mind, this is before, as I turn down my volume, this is before the age of the iPhone, when like people were walking around with touchscreen like smartphones most of the time. I associated touchscreens with being, oh, it's those really fancy things you would see in like when you go to like a retail store. They'll use like touchscreen computers and tap the screen to initiate sales, or when you go up to pay for things at like Mervyn's, if you remember that store, and you would sign on the POS system, it'd have a touchscreen where you could, where like my parents would sign their signature if they were using a credit card. So I was like, oh my god, touchscreen system, I'd really like to have one. Which was interesting because I didn't have a Game Boy Advance at the time. Part of it was because I was like, Game Boy Advance graphics look really old, which I don't think that way anymore. I have a it was just because I was such a dumb little kid. I have a Game Boy Advance SP now myself, and I now really respect the GBA SP. And yeah, so I really wanted to get one, and so I went with my dad out to EB Games, yeah, before they changed their name to GameStop, at the local shopping mall, and got my DS on New Year's Day 2004. Excuse me, New Year's Day 2005. And so that was our first handheld system. And so the DS would go on to have multiple iterations, like the DS Lite in, I think, 2006. The DS Lite basically looks kind of like a DSi in that they went over to this newer hinge system. I like the hinge system a lot better on the DS Lite than there was on the original DS, because I thought the one on the DS had like too many mechanisms and was really fragile. And the difference is that the DS Lite had a Game Boy Advance slot, just like the original DS, which was actually when I was a little kid. That was how I played GBA games. I didn't have a Game Boy Advance, so I would often play games like Avatar: The Burning Earth, and I had one of those Game Boy Advance video cards, and I would watch them on the DS. And so another system was actually the next one is the one I'm holding, the DSi, which came out in 2009. I have the one in the blue color here. It would add things like a camera. It also had a music player, and you could download games from the Nintendo DSi shop. They were basically like mini games. They were sort of like smartphone games you could get, like Skyworks arcade pinball game. Gameloft also came out with a couple racer. There was like one of the Asphalt games came to DSi, and the DSi would get even bigger, I believe, the next year with the DSi XL, which was basically bigger version of this. With instead of this has like 3.25 inch screens, the DSi XL had 4.2 inch screens. So yeah, 4 iterations of the original DS were released, and that was before the DS would eventually be succeeded in 2011 by the 3DS. But I'll save the 3DS for its birthday next February. I know it came out in March in much of the world, but it was first released in Japan in February 2011. And before I get over to the games, let me check the live chat again. Again, feel free to let me know your thoughts on the original DS and its iterations and its games in the live chat. I really enjoy doing it this way. My main inspiration for doing these console history videos was I like to watch Adam Korlick and Tweeterman's console history videos, and I wanted to do my own spin on it. Not just by talking about my own experiences, but I wanted to do them live so I could also incorporate your thoughts on the spot. So what did Nick say? The worst thing in the Mystery Dungeon games is a monster house, aka you get ambushed by a lot of Pokemon. And he said, to me, the DSi is a DS, but with no GBA slot and a camera. Yeah, and actually the camera, that's actually what got me into photography. I really started to like taking pictures on the DSi, and so I would go on to ask my mom to get me this Nikon Coolpix camera, and from there I got my hands on a few Nikon DSLRs. Which unfortunately my favorite of those is in the Nikon repair shop in New York, so I'm just using the Nikon D7000 that I got in college. Let's see what else is there. And I also really like the music player on the DSi. And it's funny because I had an iPod Touch at the same time, but I really like the idea of a Nintendo handheld that allowed you to play music. So I used to convert a lot of my iTunes songs into AAC files and play them on the DSi. And I honestly kind of wish, even though I don't think Nintendo will ever do this because they want to focus the Nintendo Switch much more on games, but I kind of wish the Switch had a music player. Like, I don't know, maybe someday, I mean, hell would have to freeze over first, but maybe Apple Music could get put on the Switch. I don't know. I mean, if they put YouTube and Hulu on the Switch, who knows? And what else? 16 years old, OMG, yes. I know it's really crazy to think that. And, I could still remember it pretty well today that, all those years ago when I went with my dad to get the DS. And it just kind of shows how time changes, too. Like, that was before the game store in my mall changed its name to GameStop. It was EB Games at the time. And you said, Nick, you got your DS in 2006. And Nick, you also said, I thought you were going to cover the 3DS on its American birthday anniversary. Yeah, I'm kind of mixed on the subject because, like, in my mind, I think of the Nintendo DSi as being, like, or actually, excuse me, the 3DS being the system that was released on March 27, 2011. And that, although that's mainly because, I live in the States, and mentally for me, that's how I think of the 3DS's anniversary. But I think, technically speaking, the 3DS's anniversary would be in February 2011 because that was when it was released in Japan. And it's the sort of thing, like, I think that's how it goes for most console anniversaries, because I remember when PlayStation was celebrating its 25th birthday, I want to say. They started celebrating it in 2009 because even though the original PlayStation was released on September 9th, 1995 in the States, it was released on December 3rd, 1994 in Japan. So that's why, in the case of PlayStation, they consider 1994 the birthday year of the original PlayStation. So that's kind of my approach on that. If anybody else, if you would personally prefer if I talked about it on its American anniversary, maybe you could let me know in the chat. So let's go over some of the games. Start off with my introduction to Super Mario 64, Super Mario 64 DS, which is basically a remake of Mario 64, but put on the DS, obviously, and utilizing some of the DS's touch controls. They also threw in some mini games, like there is one where you have to use this catapult to shoot ball bombs out of the sky, and there was this other Wanted game where you have to find, I think it was Mario, Luigi, Wario, and Yoshi on the touchscreen, and you have to find them hiding and that sort of thing. But otherwise, it's very similar to Mario 64. Another key difference, as you could probably tell from the box, is instead of just playing as Mario, you could also now play as Yoshi, Luigi, and Wario. And in fact, when you start Mario 64 DS, the very first character you play is Yoshi, because what happens is in the beginning of the game, Mario, Luigi, and Wario go into Princess Peach's castle, and they don't come out, and so Yoshi's kind of sent in to see what happened to them. I also remember there's a part of the game where Yoshi can wear like Mario's hat and walk around and look like Mario. But otherwise, it's very similar, at least to my knowledge, to the N64 version of the game. And really good introduction, I think, to video game history. Next game I wanted to talk about here, Animal Crossing Wild World. I also really, really enjoy this game. I think for me, I like Animal Crossing best when they're on Nintendo's handhelds, which is kind of a moot point nowadays now that Nintendo is really more so focusing on, doing the hybrid handheld with the Nintendo Switch. But I guess for me, I really like that convenience of being able to play Animal Crossing wherever I am, wherever I want, whether it's downstairs in my living room or going on a car trip and playing Animal Crossing Wild World. So yeah, I do really like this entry in the series. I know that this was the one that introduced Brewster, who was the coffee pigeon. And it's funny though, because it's like, even though obviously it's a virtual character drinking coffee and you're not the one sipping Joe, somehow as a kid, I really kind of like going over to Brewster's. I guess for me, it just kind of made me feel like a grown-up and like drinking this magical drink called coffee that I wasn't allowed to drink as a kid. And yeah, I would enjoy going there. And also KK Slider would be there on Saturdays, and you could ask him to play, the various different songs that he does. And yeah, I just had a good time fishing, catching bugs, and expanding the house. I think one quirk about Wild World that might put some players off is that in this game, instead of having each player have individual houses, you basically have to share the same house. But other than that, I would say it was a pretty good entry into the DS, and I used to play this a lot myself. I know that this is actually one of the first DS games that had Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, which I didn't really use on the DS, so I can't really talk about that much. I mean, me and my sis mainly just played Wild World on our own. Funny story about Wild World that just popped in my head is this is basically the reason why I don't get into doing things like altering the clock in Wild World, because I know people do that in Animal Crossing games so they can go back to days they missed and things like that. But I did that actually in Wild World. I forgot the reason why I skipped in time. It's been so many years. And my elementary school friend at the time was like, don't do that. You're going to get a ton of weeds in your town. And let's just say it took me years to pick all those weeds. So, yeah. That's why I personally can't get into doing altering the clock in the Animal Crossing games. Battle scars, we could say. So, another game I really want to show, I think you could say this was basically the Among Us of the 2000s kids. I don't have the box, but I have the cartridge, and that is Mario Kart DS. In fact, oops, I almost dropped the cartridge. Let me actually fire up the game for you. That sound familiar if you could hear my DS turn on. Yep, Mario Kart DS. Basically, I consider this one of the most defining games of the original DS, and I think in a way it might have actually started the whole fever for Mario Kart. I remember playing this game a lot as a kid. This was a very popular game in my fifth grade class. I remember whenever my teacher would have a video game day, everybody wanted to play Mario Kart DS against each other. I sucked really bad back then, and oh my god, I didn't take losing well. I'm trying to move on from that, but it was certainly the most popular game. I remember even my teacher was like, "Oh, could I try it?" And what happened was one of her students went to Taiwan and got her a DS Lite from Taiwan, and so even like my teacher was like, really interested in the whole DS craze, and so I do remember have really good memories with this game. This also had the Nintendo Wi-Fi feature, and at the time I didn't have Wi-Fi at my house, so whenever I would go to my aunt's house up in Ventura County, I wouldn't use her router to play Mario Kart matches online. Admittedly, as a kid, I was such a dumb little kid. I was I took losing so badly back then that like I didn't want to play like the Grand Prix mode. So as a kid, I would often just play the time trials and the battle and mission modes. But as I got older and learned not to take that kind of stuff personally, I started playing around with the Grand Prix modes, and I'm decent at the 50 and 100cc modes. I'm okay at 150cc at a push, and so that is Mario Kart DS. I highly recommend it if you want to get a DS and you don't have one. Next up, the bane of my existence, Rhythm Heaven. Oh boy. This is the one Nintendo franchise that, like, whenever I think of this game, it makes me really, really angry, to be quite honest, because I really suck at at Rhythm Heaven. It's just that whenever I try it, I don't know if I suck or the game is just, if they're just really, like, picky, but it's like whenever I play the main mode, they say that, not bad, but you suck ass. Which, they don't obviously use the word suck ass, but but I tried my best. So, but regardless of my personal feelings, I know that my sis really likes this game. I know that, she was the one who really wanted to get it. I think we first played it in a Target, and I sucked, and I was like, "Oh no, you're getting that game." And so, and I jokingly mean this, like, I don't like mean this like, oh, if you play Rhythm Heaven, you're like my enemy or anything like that. But I kind of jokingly think that whenever I see like Rhythm Heaven, or when I heard that it was coming out the uh for the Wii, I was like, no, Nintendo, don't bring it to the Wii. And I didn't mean that seriously. It's just the kind of thing where it's just, or I think I was just thinking, oh, that game scarred me as a kid. So I don't know, I don't know if I'm like the one person. I know, Nick, you said that you're not very good at rhythm games either. I was more of a Guitar Hero person, by the way. But yeah, Rhythm Heaven, you'll probably like it, and maybe I'll try it again someday. But I just know I'm not very good at this kind of game. And so I don't know, like, what if I one day did a live stream of the Wii version? I think it was called Rhythm Heaven Fever. I even have like a tough time saying the name Rhythm Heaven. And I feel like I'm saying rah. And so, anyway, Brain Age, honestly, it's one of those games that like I kind of got as a kid, like, because I was thinking, oh, my parents will be happy with it because it's educational. But it's basically, a game that, trains your brain and gets you to think faster. There's a whole ton of things. Like, I remember there were, like, math challenges, and you would have to read, like, this short story, and the game will time you. and that sort of thing. There was also a Sudoku game, but I'm not very good at Sudoku. And I mean, this game was all right. I played it quite a bit on the original DS. Actually, it's one of those DS games where you don't play the game like this, like horizontally. You have to flip the system over like a book, and that's how you play the game. And so next, I really like this game too. Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. This was the I think this was the first Mario and Sonic Olympic game released for the Beijing Olympics in 2008. Surprisingly, this is the only Mario and Sonic Olympic game that I personally could get into. I've tried playing the London one, and I think what I prefer about these games, especially when you go to the normal modes, is I really like when they just kind of stick to more straightforward sort of games. Like they just, like in the archery mode, you just have to shoot the arrow at one target. In the London game, I think they went even crazier, and they were like, you have to shoot like 4 different targets as the camera pans over. But I kind of like how it stuck to a more realistic style with this version of the game, and that's probably why I like this one the most. And so, yeah, I remember playing this quite a bit as a kid as well. And I know it's really crazy. Mario and Sonic, it's like, what? The two former competitors, Nintendo and Sega, getting together at last. But, hey, as Forrest Gump might say, it's like Mario and Sonic were as cool as peas and carrots. Yeah, I could imagine that not going very well at, like, a gaming convention. Okay, so Professor Layton in the Curious Village. Again, my sis is, I think the one big difference between me and my sis is she's the one who's much better at puzzle games than I am. Like, I like playing games like Tetris every once in a while, but she's, like, much more of a master compared to me. And so Professor Layton, game with all these sorts of different puzzles you have to figure out. They're actually really quite tricky puzzles to figure out. And so, yeah, so it's a really fun game. And then talk about these two games, the two Assassin's Creed games. I actually played Assassin's Creed 2 Discovery quite a bit as a kid. I really liked this game. I beat it back when I was a little kid. So it's basically, for these Assassin's Creed games, they're basically like tongue twister, side-scrolling platformer games where in this game you're going around as the character Ezio and you're taking down assassins with your sword. It actually got some really nice combos in the game in terms of, like, they have some really cool stealth attacks and this gameplay mechanic where you could break the block. Like if your enemy was like guarding himself with a sword, you had this ability where you could swing the sword and break the block and just slash up the enemy. And so, yeah, I really got into this game quite a bit. Funny story about this version was I was introduced to this version because I was watching Apple's iPhone event at the time, and Ubisoft announced that this game was coming to the iPhone. But when I heard it was coming to the DS, I think I was thinking, I think I would prefer it on DS because I would get physical controls that way. And so this has become one of my favorite original DS games. I have played it again very recently, like in the last month or so, and I still need to practice because I haven't played this game in years, but I highly recommend this. Even if you're not an Assassin's Creed fan, if you're a fan of like action platformers, I think you'll really like this game. And the same could be said to the game that came before it, Assassin's Creed Altair's Chronicles. As a kid, I played this version on my iPod Touch as a kid, but it was also released on the original DS. Excuse me. So, in a very similar premise, I would say that the worlds are maybe a bit more of it has more of a bit of a more 3D platformer sort of feel in terms of how you can walk around. One thing that I find really strange about the DS version as a kid is you have the ability to go up to certain enemies and poke at their pressure points as a way to suss answers out of them. And on the iPhone version, it was okay, but on the original DS, maybe I just need to practice, but there's like a certain one where you have to like draw a line on the screen, but I don't know if it's just that you have to draw in a straight line. Maybe somebody who's played the game in the chat could let me know how it really works. But aside from that, I would say that the original DS version is pretty good too. Okay. So before I get to the sales of the original DS, the lifetime sales, I'll look once again in the live chat again. This is the time for you to let me know your thoughts on the original DS if you're currently watching the stream. Let's see, what else did you say, Nick? I didn't time travel in Wild World, but I used Action Replay and turned on the max spells code. LOL. Rhythm Heaven games are awesome, though I'm bad at rhythm games, which you talked about. If you want to stream Rhythm Heaven Fever, do it. Maybe someday, just just for fun. Maybe I will. I did recently buy this adapter that would allow me to stream GameCube games. There's an HDMI adapter, but I have to see if it works with my current AverMedia game capture device. And Nick, you also said, "Hey, Professor Layton." Yeah, Professor Layton is cool. I've heard recently that the developer for Professor Layton Level 5, I think, did they like close up their North American operations, which would suck, because I think it would be nice if Professor Layton came to Switch. But we'll have to see how that goes. So I'm actually going to double check the lifetime sales of the original DS. I know it was one of Nintendo's most successful systems, not just handhelds, but like consoles of all time. But I'd have to look that up again just to be sure. So this number is not including the 3DS, because the 3DS is considered a completely different platform. So again, looking at it. Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, my God. So, yeah, the original DS sold. I hope you're sitting down for this. Nearly 155 million systems. So, that would make it the most successful handheld of all time. It's still, like, the highest selling console of all time is still the PlayStation 2 at nearly 158 million units sold. But yeah, still, Nintendo DS. It's basically, you could say, Nintendo's most successful console of all time. So, yeah, and I think honestly what made the DS successful was that it had a decent amount of games for many kinds of players, whether you're whether you're more of a casual gamer or you like really spending time with the more complex games like the Legend of Zelda games. I would say if you're looking for like the more like meaty hardcore games, the PSP has the better choices, but if you're really into video games, the DS is still a really good choice. And I think the thing that I personally like, I can't say this is the reason why the DS is successful, but this is what I personally like about the system, is we know that Nintendo, especially in recent years especially when Iwata used to be the president of Nintendo, was the kind of company that would always like to rethink how can we make the gameplay on our systems unique. And so what I like about the DS is not just that the dual screens were really unique and that this bottom one is a touchscreen, but I think what makes this approach much more approachable than the other kinds of gameplay mechanics Nintendo has had is that it felt very like natural. It almost felt like second nature to pick up a DS and like actually start playing it, because it was really adaptable. It wasn't the kind of thing where it was like a Wii where you would have to like get up and use your Wii remote and swinging it around. Like, no, this is something that's much more laid back, or that you would have to use a large controller or a tablet controller like on the Wii U. Again, the Wii U gamepad isn't heavy, but it's a kind of a wide controller. Yeah, as you could see right here. So yeah, because it's fairly light. I think it only weighs like a pound or so, but it's still like a really wide controller. And there are times where I'm like, I really wish certain games would just let me use the Wii U Pro controller. But I think the DS was one of the more approachable Nintendo systems at the time, and that's why it became as successful as it did. And then also, of course, Nintendo had a really good lineup of games. The one game I forgot to mention earlier was actually Nintendogs. I remember. I mean, nowadays I don't really play Nintendogs. I remember me and my sis as kids, we used to like taking care of dogs in the game. It's actually one of those games that like my uncle introduced me to because I remember going over to his place and he mentioned, "Hey, have you heard of Nintendogs?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, it's coming out this coming summer." And yeah, I got the Chihuahua version. I like going to competitions and taking care of the dogs in the game and giving them baths. So yeah, that was fun. And so overall, I would say that the Nintendo DS was a really good system, one of the more approachable Nintendo systems at the time. I still have really fond memories of it. It ranks up there with some of my favorite um, Nintendo systems, certainly handhelds. And so yeah, it's a pretty good system. So if anybody else is in the live chat, could let me know what you think of the original Nintendo DS. I know that the DSi has a few like specific games for that system, like Flipnote Studio, but I'll save that for another day. I think did I do a DSi stream in the past? I might do another one like in this format where I talk about like the history and lifetime sales. So no, I haven't. So maybe I'll do one for the DSi so I could go over its features. Yeah, I actually did one for the 3DS, but that was back on its North American release date, and I didn't really talk about like the development of that system. I think there's actually an Iwata Asks interview that goes over the development of the DSi. And the weird thing is that even though the DS was a really successful system, I honestly kind of wonder if with the DSi, if Nintendo was trying to play a little bit of catch up to Sony, which is weird because the kind of weird in retrospect because the DS was the more successful system. Although the PSP did pretty good itself, especially for non Nintendo handheld, it was quite phenomenal. I think it sold like over 70 million units. But the thing about the PSP was that it wasn't just a gaming handheld, but it also had the ability to play music and show photos and movies, and you could download games. Like I remember um, downloading some demos onto my PSP. So what I'm thinking is maybe Nintendo was trying to do that approach with the DSi, where it's like, hey, we'll give you a camera, downloadable titles, and a music player. And so maybe that's what they were thinking. I mean, it's still really nice to have. I mean, I really liked how the DSi had its own camera and music player. But yeah, I think I'll save that discussion for maybe next year when the DSi's anniversary is coming around. And actually, a funny question that I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if like most people who have DSs have DS lights. Like, are the DS lights the most successful of the four variants of the DS? Because whenever I would come up and like see people with DSs, they were playing the DS Lite. I didn't really know too many people. My cousin had a original DS. He had the red Mario Kart version, but I never really saw people with original DSs. Most people I know either have DS Lites or DSi's. I think I'll also really should invite the people on my Discord. If you want to join my Discord, it's down below in the description. Maybe we could talk more about the original DS after the stream is over. Nick, what did you say? I have a silver DS Lite now. Cool. I used to have a red DS Lite, and my mom had a blue DS Lite. So wow, even your mom got one. And yeah, that was the thing at the time because I remember hearing with the original DS, it was such a approachable system that even like parents and grandparents got the system. And that was actually why I think that was why Nintendo came out with games like Brain Age and Nintendogs to cater to people who weren't currently into video games. They wanted to get them into doing things like, oh, here's brain training. These kind of games that you wouldn't necessarily think of as like games per se, like, you know, going on a big story in Legend of Zelda or Super Mario, but kind of more like a laid back things like brain training or taking care of your pets in Nintendogs. Or even Big Brain Academy, which I also have for my original DS. It was another one of those games where it's like, I'm sure my parents will let me have it because it's educational. Yeah. Although I could see the appeal of the DS Lite much more than the original DS, since the original DS's design, like you could go and Google it up. It's kind of a bulky design, and like I said, I don't really like the hinge design of the original DS. I think that's why mine didn't last long because it was like it had like several like different like, you know, parts of the hinge, and I think that made it more fragile. Whereas with the DS Lite, like basically it had a very similar hinge design to the Game Boy Advance SP. But I think Nintendo realized the problem when they made the DS Lite, DSi, and DSi XL because they would go on to use hinges that had like a much more simpler construction. So instead of like the multiple parts you saw with the GBASP, they just moved over to like there's a couple like parts, seams on the hinge itself, but it's like a much more like smooth contraption. We think that you could basically say the DS was like the Game Boy craze, but for the 2000s kids, if you will. So I think I'll keep the stream going 10 more minutes in case anybody else comes by. So now that I've done these Nintendo streams, I think I'll be able to get back to doing some more of my regular videos. Because I'm still thinking of doing videos on Wonder Woman 1984, Tom and Jerry, And I really want to do one on Doom Eternal because I've heard actually what's going on with Doom Eternal is that it's going to be a digital only release on the Switch. Which I'll talk more about my thoughts on that when I get to doing that video. I actually spent an hour yesterday recording footage of Doom 2016, mainly to show people, hey, this is what the game looks like on Switch and it runs pretty well. And basically what I was going to say is as long as it runs as well as it does on the as well as Doom 2016 does on the original Switch, then I think it's all good. Nick, you said I don't have much to say about the DS TVH, but though I hope to be more active on the Discord. I have one more question though. Did you ever play Starfy, the legendary Starfy? Which I'm trying to find my copy of the game. I briefly played it. I have my copy. I'm not sure where it is. But yeah, it's a pretty approachable game. I saw the trailer and I thought it was cute. I know some people like kind of say, "Oh, Starfy is just Kirby underwater," but I liked it. I wish they would make another Starfy game for Switch. Or I hate to be one of these people, but maybe even put him in Smash one of these days along with his sister. But yeah, I'm really down for like talking more about the really like any of the Nintendo consoles on Discord. Yeah, because I would like to be more active there. Maybe when they start a Nintendo dedicated Discord channel. Maybe I could even do like a Nintendo one and have a Disney one and that sort of thing. I'm still really getting the hang of using Discord. Nick, you said I haven't played Starfy, but it looks like an awesome game. Also, yes, I want Starfy in Smash, and I think he would be a pretty good character. If I ever do find my copy, I'll try playing Starfy again. So keep the stream going for a couple more minutes in case anybody else drops by. Right, so I think I'll end things off here for now. So if you tuned in, thank you for watching. If you want to talk more about the original DS or even any of the systems that I've been doing live streams of for the past couple of days, GameCube, Wii U, or original Wii, or original DS, we could do that in the Discord. Hoping next year, I think maybe I'll do streams talking about the 3DS and maybe the DSi. I'm still on the fence of what I want to do for the original Switch because I know that anniversary's coming up, and maybe I'll do a video talking about how I feel about the system and any like concerns I have or what I hope that Nintendo does in the future. So yes, Nick, thank you for joining me. If you have anything else to say, leave a comment down below when the stream ends, or you could let me know on Discord. Please check out the Discord and the link in the description. Excuse me. So until next time, this has been Bloodman Bobby, and thank